MMA Meltdown on the Fight Network continues. I'm Gabriel Morency. Thanks to Reed Kuhn, Fightnomics.com for joining us. Excellent insight from Reed, as always. You've worked with Reed before. Very, very sharp guy, isn't he?
Yeah, very smart guy, and he's got a really cool perspective. There's a lot of different ways to look at fighting, a lot of different ways to look at anything in life, and his perspective is very unique to him. It's always good to chat with him.
Now, one thing that both me and Reed agreed on is that you'd have to be crazy to lay minus 450 or 5-1 on Anderson Silva. The guy's coming back, 13-month layoff. Yeah. He broke his leg. Before that, he got knocked the F out, pretty hard, too. He clowned around, and he got knocked out. And you remember Longo saying, hey, I'm worried about this guy in the future. Can he be able to handle this again? You know, he's been working with sports psychologists. You know, it's hard to believe, and I brought this up with Reed, he hasn't won a fight since October 2012 and beating Stephan Bonner. Now, Diaz hasn't won a fight in a while either, but he fought GSP and he fought Carlos Condit.
10 hard rounds.
In a pretty close fight against Carlos Condit. Nobody's ever questioned Nick Diaz's heart. I mean, when he got stopped against Nunes, doctor stoppage, you have to go back to, his fifth fight, I believe, early in his career, when he actually got knocked out in another lifetime in 2002. What do you make of this fight?
I love it. All the reasons you're describing is why it's interesting. Sometimes we like fights because they're so closely matched up. Sometimes because you think some guy's going to win or the other. There's a lot of different reasons, but this one is because there's so many questions. Like, we don't know. We don't know the answers to so many of these things.
They both sort of want to do the same thing, though. They both, Anderson wants to knock you out in spectacular fashion. And Diaz wants to get in the pocket and bang.
And that on paper alone, you're like, this would be a really cool fight. But then you got all these weird variables to which you have very few answers, no matter how you look at it, until those two guys get into a cage together. That's why this one is a must-watch for sure. I dig it. I talked about it on 5 Rounds this week. One of the key weapons to fighting a Diaz brother, like, you know why they can land all those shots and throw so many punches? Because they're really heavy on the front leg. A lot of guys don't want to be that heavy on the front leg, so they stay heavy on the front leg. And
Anderson kicked that leg after breaking his leg,
that's the thing, right? One of the great weapons, and a lot of guys have used it against Nate in the last while, too. And the thing about the Diaz brothers, they don't care. They're like, kick my leg, go ahead, which is not the recommended way to handle it. It's to check the kick, but when you're heavy on the front leg, you cannot lift your leg to check it until you transfer your weight to the back. And the leg to kick it with against the southpaw, which they both are, is the left leg. The leg the guy broke in half. That alone, to me, is absolutely fascinating.
And if you're Diaz, obviously, you're going to test that leg with a couple of kicks of your own, aren't you?
Well, hey, there's some guys who are like, there's this weird respect in martial arts. No. You know who isn't one of those guys? Nick Diaz.
No, he's going to be like, if you're in the cage, then you're in the cage.
Exactly. And he's absolutely right to do that. And that alone is fascinating. But you have to watch it. You got to see it. And I had David Mullins on the show, too, on Monday. He's Conor McGregor's, he's a sports psychologist for sports psychology consultant for SBG Ireland. So Conor McGregor, Gunnar Nelson, a bunch of these guys. And he's just completely fascinated by this one because both of these guys also are kind of play games. And rarely do you get two guys together who play those games with each other. There's a lot of good stuff.
Of course, the psychologist loves this. You got two guys you can make a lot of money off on the couch.
Oh, yeah.
Anderson, sports psychology. Diaz, just say.
Good luck with trying to head shrink Nick Diaz.
So we don't have time to talk about all the fights, but what's cool about this is since we're talking fantasy MMA, we are going to talk about some of these prelims because we got a great card stacked from top to bottom. And like Reed said, a lot of the recent cards, a lot of no-name fighters, local guys from different countries, etc.
What's his name versus who's it?
We've got information on every fighter on this card. When you got Lineker and you got McCall buried on the prelims, you got yourself a good card. When Misha Tate and Sarah McMahon are buried on the card, you got yourself a pretty good card. So we got a $1,000 free roll over at countermove.com. It's very simple. You pick 5 fighters. You'll see the salaries. It's easy. It's so easy. Me and Black figured it out.
You did.
And hey, I even win every once in a while. So I
never win.
Very, very fun to play. Great stuff. So let's start off with your picks here, Robin. Who'd you take?
Well, you know, I've had mixed success with this. Sometimes I pick the winners because my job is figuring out how the fight might go. And I'm actually not a guy who will often go out on a limb and pick winners in my analysis. I like trying to figure out the minutiae of how the fights will go. So I'm terrible at counter move. That's just a fact. Like, I'm just not good at it.
It's funny how knowledge doesn't parlay into gambling or gambling into fantasy, etc.
I can tell
Everybody
you.
has their niche, Black.
Yeah, I can tell you which aspects of the fight will happen. And that's what I love to do, and that's what break it down. But as far as how to figure out who's going to do it in what round in such a way on what money, just not good at that.
Dude,
but it's fun though.
You know, I'm in the gambling world, and I'm friends, and I speak to a lot of odds makers, and trust me, people that trainers, fighters, everyone in the fight game, they never win, Robin.
Yeah.
You know, the so-called experts never win.
Yeah.
It's the guy's never been in a fight in his life that lives in his mom's basement that's nailing winners. All right, we only got 3 minutes.
I got Anderson Silva, and I'm like, well, it's Anderson Silva, and it's hard to finish Nick Diaz. It could go 25 minutes, and if he gets a knockout, you get points and counter move. Jordan Mean, he's your value of the night. To $5,000, he's exciting. You got to have him. John Lineker was cheap, and he's fun to watch. And if he lands the bomb at 125, he knocks you out cold. $4,100, a good pick. Tom Kong Watson, he likes to get in there and throw lots of punches. Punches paying counter move. And I had $5,300 left, so I just took the most expensive guy. I don't know how to play this game, and I never win. So I'm like, Thiago Santos, yeah, sign me up. I'll take him.
You know what? If you're playing counter move, generally the real sharp guys, the guys who win a lot of money playing fantasy MMA, they don't go for the main event cards. They're going for the prelim mismatches.
Thiago Santos.
But there's not a lot of prelim mismatches. Last week in Sweden, we had 10-1 favorites. Bektik was a 7-1 favorite.
Yeah.
You know, we had these guys 12-1 favorites. We don't have that this week, so it's a little bit trickier. I'm going to start off with Al Quinta taking on Lozon. I think it's a great matchup. Even though Quinta's 3 losses have all been by sub, which is pretty dangerous when you're fighting Lozon. Lozon's been in a lot of battles, you know this. He also takes a lot of abuse. Yeah. Who gets beat up more than Lozon? He's a warrior with the blood and everything. Yeah. But Quinta's on a roll. I think he might be that next big thing out of Long Island. Give me Quinta. We played at $4,900. Ed Herman and Brunson. This fight was supposed to be last month. Yeah. You know, a lot of smack talk going back and forth. I got respect for Ed Herman, but here's another guy. He takes a lot of damage, Robin. He's willing to engage with you, and I think that Brunson will be able to rack up some points at $5,000. This one, from a betting standpoint, I'm not sure I would take Tyrone Woodley against Gastelum. I don't know. It's so tough, this fight. But at $4,600 in a fantasy world, hey, man, Woodley's finished people, Robin.
Yeah.
Woodley's got those heavy hands of stone. So at $4,600, I like it. Dallas ladies, guy's been on a roll, man. 4-0 since his return to the UFC.
Maybe get your first round sub.
He's been dominant. I think Bosch will be very, very vulnerable to a submission. Bosch is tough as hell, man. Tough as nails, but man, he takes a lot of abuse, this guy. His defense is awful. It really is. And we're going to wrap it up with a fight that I can't wait to watch. Jordan Mean and Alves.
Yeah.
Going to be a high-volume fight. Alves comes to fight. Mean's a high-volume fighter. Yeah. I think Mean's going to win the fight, and I think he's going to rack up the points.
Yeah, young and hungry, and even at that age has, I think, like 930 fights or something. He's got a lot of fights, that kid.
Great card. All right, we got 30 seconds on the way out. From a betting standpoint, I'm kind of torn here. Misha Tate and Sarah McMahon. Will the wrestling nullify?
Wrestling wins fights, man. Like high-level wrestling wins fights. She looked really evolved in their last couple fights other than the Ronda loss.
Normally, I'm all over the women's fights from a fantasy standpoint because they rack up a lot of points. There's a lot of action in women's fights, but this one's a little bit different with a wrestler and Sarah McMahon.
Elite wrestler, yeah. Yeah, maybe you stay away from it. I don't know.
Tough. All right, we'll come back. We're going to wrap it up. We got some videos for you on the way out. MMA Meltdown continues.